covering the community, the people, events, and issues of Georgia, Carolina. This is the Means Report. Now, from the studios of WJBF News Channel 6 in Television Park in downtown Augusta, here's Brad Means.
Hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Means Report. We appreciate it, and we are grateful to all of our servicemen and women who are watching today. Why do I say that? Well, of course, because this next week brings us Veterans Day, and we want to honor our veterans, and we want to honor those who are continuing to serve this nation with a very special 30 minutes on the Means Report. You know, it was back in 1918 when Augusta's own President Woodrow Wilson first started to think about the idea of what would become Veterans Day. It was June of 1918 when the Treaty of Versailles was signed, but go back about 7 months prior to that and you'll find that that is actually when the fighting stopped and ended the war to end all wars, aka World War I. And that fighting stoppage, or armistice, took place around November. And so you had President Woodrow Wilson a few months later declaring November 1918 the first Armistice Day. Fast forward a few decades, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower changed Armistice Day to Veterans Day. And so it is now November 11th of every year, and coming up in just a few short days, a day when we will pause to honor our heroes. And we have a couple of great men here to talk about United States veterans, what they mean to us, and how they're being put in the spotlight lately. And we want to talk about that today on this edition of the Means Report. And we're going to begin with filmmaker Mark Albertin, who's been kind enough to come back to the News Channel 6 studios. We were talking about his last visit that he and I had here going back about a decade or so ago when his film Augusta Remembers came out. And so Mark Albertin, thank you so much for being here on the Means Report. Welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Just to bring everybody up to speed, how's the last 10 years or so gone for Augusta Remembers? This was a film that chronicled the history of Augusta, all the good and bad and devastation and success that has happened in this great town. And you've had a lot of opportunities to show that and to celebrate that over the years, I know.
We have, and it met huge success when it came out. People are really excited to have something like that. And the Augusta Chronicle just recently released a DVD version of it, because at that time, everything was VHS. Mm-hmm. So now, thankfully, it's DVD, and there's extra material on there, extra interviews that weren't on the original that we were able to put on there thanks to the DVD format. So that worked out very well.
Well, I want to make sure before you get out of here, we tell people how to get their copy of Augusta Remembers, and I also want to talk more specifically today about your new film, War Stories, and Augusta's veterans talking to you. These, first of all, before we get started, are World War II veterans, right?
Correct.
All right. These, at last check, are men who are dying at the rate of about 1,000 a day nationwide. So their stories need to be heard. Before you talk about some of the things that you were able to document through these veterans, tell me why you did this. What motivated you to go from telling the story of a city to the story of these people who served our country?
You know, I guess, Brad, always in my mind, I've always had a feeling that recording and documenting history, especially oral history, is extremely important. You know, it's amazing how fast time goes by. And I saw this in 2000 when my dad passed away. He was a World War II veteran. Mm-hmm. He and I talked a little bit about his war experiences, but not a lot. He really didn't talk a lot about it. And I kind of kicked myself for not interviewing him, not talking to him. But at the time, I really wasn't doing a lot of filming. So I guess you could say I'm making up for lost time. Brandon Wild had contacted me, Beverly Dorn with Brandon Wild had contacted me, and she had asked that I come out there. She saw Augusta Remembers, and she said, would it be possible if you did some impromptu interviews with some of the vets that we have here that are from the World War II era? I said, certainly. So that brought me into the Veterans History Project at that time, and that was probably in 2005 that I was doing that. A little while later, Fred Gailey, who was spearheading with the Augusta Richmond County Historical Society their end of the Veterans History Project and doing interviews, contacted me and knew about Augusta Remembers, knew about another film that I made called Twice a Hero, the Jimmy Dias story, mm-hmm. And knew that I was involved in that type of thing. And they contracted me to do a documentary, which we now call War Stories, Augusta Area Veterans Remember World War II.
Did you find that these veterans were willing, most of them, to speak to you?
I did. You know, some of them still, even after all these years, are experiencing a lot of pain mm-hmm. from that experience. Mm-hmm. You know, no one was meant to see what they saw. What people see in war, there's no amount of training, I don't think, that could ever really prepare you for what you're going to see and what you're going to go through. And these men and women that are in armed services are just unbelievable patriots in what they've done for our country, and continue to do for our country. So I was honored to be able to do this film.
I want to show our viewers a clip of the film. Can you tell them what they're about to see?
I believe the clip that you have is with Mr. Stanley, who's from North Augusta, or no, I'm sorry, he's from Aiken, and he's talking about flak. And flak was something, if you were a pilot, that was something that was a miserable, horrible thing. It was a random type of attack. It wasn't like you had an enemy charging you with a bayonet. This could go off underneath you, above you, on your side, anywhere. So you can imagine the anxiety of these people in these planes when they were off on a bombing mission somewhere, and what they had to go through.
All right, folks, take a look now as this veteran takes us back in Mark Albertin's brand new film, War Stories, Augusta Area Veterans Remember World War II.
But the flak, you look ahead there, and like POSTEN, just that cloud. And you knew you had to go through it. And you knew what you were going to be facing. That stuff was going to come through like hail on the roof again. But you never turned back. In no single case in the World War II did a bomb group ever turn back because of the target. They turned back because of the weather, because they couldn't see it, couldn't get through, but they always had to go through, so I mean you had to face it. And you'd get in the flak, and like I say, you'd lose a couple airplanes. One time, our wingman, just right on our wing. And I'd gone to school with a bombardier, and Pop had gone to transition with the pilot. And the airplane just blew up. It's just gone. In a situation like that, everybody would watch the debris going down and look for parachutes. Of course, you wanted 10, but you'd see 1, you'd see 2, and maybe you'd see 3. In some cases, if it hadn't really destructed too badly, you'd see 10 parachutes. But most of the time, 3 or 4 airplanes, parachutes. So then you drop your bombs, and then you head for home, and then that's when the fighters would come in. And before, the fighters never were after you over the target, of course. They weren't that foolish. But after you got off the target, they would literally tip on their sides and come through your formation. These guys were good pilots. And their gunners would be firing lots of noise. Machine guns, 50 caliber machine guns are just chattering away, and the shells are all over the floor, and the guys had to kick them out. And then you just get on home, and people would fall away. Engines would quit after torture like that. And but that's one more mission.
Great job, Mark. One thing I noticed about Mr. Stanley, 2 things I want to ask you about. The uniform still fits and still has it. How'd that come together?
Worked out very well. When I called him to do the preliminary interview and tell him that I was coming to do an interview with him and that what we were working on, he said, well, I have the uniform still, my original uniform. If you'd like, I can wear it. And I was like, of course, that'd be wonderful.
Absolutely.
And so here, he had all his medals and everything from his battles, and his memory was sharp as a tack.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. The second thing I noticed was the intensity in his face, the seriousness and the vivid memories that apparently he can still call upon when he tells these stories. Did you see that in person?
I saw it in person with almost all the interviews. I mean, I was talking earlier, and this type of thing, you know, you can put it behind you, but you can never erase it. It's always there.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these World War II veterans, they came home, they basically built America when you think about it. They came through a depression, they came here after the war, and they put it behind them. Many of them never talked about it until later years. And I think a lot of them now are feeling like we really need to tell this story. Time is going by here. And all of them, though, had this emotional tie to that past. The stories, as say, some of them were very painful for a lot of these folks to tell. What I have done here is just a fraction of what is being done locally and nationally. The Veterans History Project, which this is a part of basically, is huge, and it is wonderful. And I mentioned Fred Gailey earlier. They've interviewed, I think at this point, about 700 people in the CSRA, veterans from World War II, which is phenomenal. I had about 23 in this film, so it's just a small, minuscule sampling, but all the same, all the interviews, I'm sure, are wonderful.
Do you think that war stories, Augusta area veterans remember World War II, can connect with young people? What message do you think they might get out of it? Some members of the greatest generation will watch this and identify with their peers. What about young folks?
Well, I'll tell you what it did for me. It made me feel like, well, my little petty problems that I have are nothing.
Yep.
When you hear about what these people went through, what they saw, and then what they came home to do in this country afterwards, the strength that they had morally and physically to go through what they went through, my life is so small compared to theirs. It's unbelievable.
I heard a prisoner of war from Vietnam spent 6 years at the Hanoi Hilton speaking, and he said ever since he got home from Vietnam, he's never, ever had a bad day.
I can imagine. You know, I mean, you really would appreciate being back in the United States and being able to kiss the ground. One gentleman interviewed talked about when they came home, the pilot took them, and they were in a big plane, and he flew around the Statue of Liberty a few times, and he said there was not a word. It was totally silent. You could hear a pin drop. Everybody was just staring there, looking at Lady Liberty coming home to America.
How can people see this movie?
It will be coming up the 14th. That's Sunday. The 14th, and it will be playing over at the Augusta State University at the Jaguar Student Activity Center. The times are 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. Please come early because we're hoping that we get a good big crowd, and there'll be plenty of seating for everyone.
And I know that you'll probably announce this at Augusta State on Sunday, a week from now, but how can people get a copy of Augusta Remembers now that it's out on DVD?
Augusta Remembers is available through the Chronicle, and I believe they have them at Borders Books and Music also, from what I understand. So, and this film will be available at the premiere, and then they'll be putting it in the same locations too, probably at Borders and different outlets around the city.
Well, you've done a wonderful job, Mark, and I just want to say thank you for taking the initiative to do this film, and I know a lot of people are going to see it, and I know a lot of veterans already appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. Anytime. Mark Albertin, filmmaker and true wonderful American, paying tribute to the greatest generation. Go see that movie, War Stories, Augusta Area Veterans Remember World War II, 1 week from today at Augusta State University. Still to come on the Means Report, we'll hear from a man who's lived life as an American hero, who served this country, who went to Vietnam, and has come to the set of the Means Report to tell his stories. It is a Veterans Day special on the Means Report.